What if Tom Hanks discovered his gardener's shocking secret, living in a tent just steps from his mansion, and woke up speechless the next day? This story will grip you. Before we dive in, drop a comment with your city. I want to know where you're at. Hit like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales. Let's roll! The December wind howled through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, carrying a bite that chilled everything it touched. Inside a faded blue tent, pitched unevenly behind a row of overgrown bushes, Maria Torres shivered under a thin sleeping bag. She was 28 years old, and life had taken turns she never expected. Her home was this tent, hidden near the edge of a sprawling estate she worked at daily. She blinked awake, her eyes adjusting to the weak morning light seeping through the tent's torn fabric. Her breath puffed out in small clouds, a reminder of the cold she couldn't escape. Maria sat up slowly, her body aching from the hard ground. She pulled the sleeping bag tighter around her shoulders, trying to hold on to its faint warmth. Outside, the world was stirring, but here, in her tiny shelter, time felt frozen. She reached for a cracked plastic bowl resting on an overturned crate beside her. It was her treasure, a simple item she'd found discarded months ago. To Maria, it was more than junk. It was a piece of her resilience. The tent wasn't much, but she'd made it her own. A folded jacket served as a pillow on the dirt floor. A small stack of clothes sat in one corner, carefully organized despite the cramped space. In another corner, a few essentials, a water bottle, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, were lined up neatly. Maria took pride in keeping things orderly. It was her way of holding onto control in a life that had slipped out of her hands. She unzipped the tent flap, letting in a rush of icy air that made her wince. Snow wasn't common here, but the wind carried a damp chill that sank into her bones. Maria stepped outside, clutching her bowl. Her sneakers crunched on the frosty grass as she moved toward the back of the estate. She worked there as a gardener, tending the lush grounds of a massive property owned by someone she'd never met face to face. Her job was her lifeline, a thin thread keeping her from complete collapse. The estate's rear gate loomed ahead, its iron bars gleaming in the pale light. Beyond it lay a dumpster, tucked beside the kitchen area where staff tossed out scraps after lavish meals. Maria had learned the cook's routine over the past 7 months. Every morning they left a bag of leftovers outside. Slightly bruised fruit, day-old bread, bits of meat too small for the main dishes. They never spoke of it, but Maria knew it was for her. She approached the dumpster, her eyes meeting those of a young cook who stood nearby. He gave a quick nod, then turned back inside, leaving her alone with the bag. Maria knelt on the cold pavement and opened it carefully. Today's haul was generous. A few apples with soft spots, a chunk of crusty bread, and half a roasted chicken leg. She arranged the food in her bowl, taking a moment to make it look presentable. Even here, she wanted to feel human. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, her mind drifting to how she'd ended up in this place. It hadn't happened all at once. First, her father's heart attack drained their savings. Then the rent hikes forced her out of her apartment. Now, she was here, surviving day by day. When she finished, Maria wiped the bowl clean with her sleeve. She stood, brushing crumbs from her worn jeans. The estate's gardens waited for her, and she couldn't be late. She returned to her tent, stashing the bowl inside, then grabbed her gardening tools from a sack hidden under a bush. Her hands were rough from work, her nails chipped, but she carried herself with quiet determination. Today was another chance to keep going, to earn enough to care for her father, who lay weak in a care facility across town. Maria slipped through a side gate into the estate, her heart lifting slightly at the sight of the gardens. The rows of roses, the trimmed hedges, the stone paths. They were her creation, her mark on a world that had turned its back on her. She began her tasks, pruning branches and clearing fallen leaves, losing herself in the rhythm of the work. The cold faded from her mind as she focused on the plants. For a few hours, she could forget the tent, the hunger, the worry. She was just a gardener, doing her job. The sun climbed higher over the estate, casting golden streaks across the gardens Maria tended. She knelt beside a bed of lavender, her shears snipping away at overgrown stems. Her hands moved with steady precision, shaping the plants into orderly rows. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the December chill, a sign of her focus. The estate sprawled around her, acres of green framed by a towering house of glass and stone. She rarely thought about who lived there. Her world was the soil, the leaves, the small victories of keeping it alive. As she worked, a faint buzz broke her concentration. Maria paused, brushing dirt from her hands, and reached into her pocket. Her phone, an old model with a cracked screen, lit up with a message. It was from the care facility where her father stayed. Her stomach tightened as she read the words, "Payment overdue. Please settle by tomorrow." She stared at the screen, her breath catching. The money she earned barely covered food and gas. Saving enough for his care felt like chasing a horizon that kept moving farther away. Maria slipped the phone back into her pocket, her jaw set. She couldn't dwell on it now. She had to finish her work. Standing, she grabbed a rake and started clearing a path littered with twigs and dry petals. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone steadied her nerves. She moved toward the far end of the garden, where a pond shimmered under the midday light. Its surface rippled gently, dotted with lily pads. Maria set the rake aside and picked up a net, skimming the water to remove stray leaves. While she worked, a glint beneath the pond's surface caught her eye. She leaned closer, squinting. Something metallic rested on the muddy bottom. A thin, coiled shape, too deliberate to be debris. Her pulse quickened. It looked like a watch, its band catching the sunlight. Maria hesitated. Retrieving it could mean proving her care, maybe even earning a bonus. But the water was cold, and she had no spare clothes if she got soaked. She glanced around. The garden was empty, the house quiet. No one would see her try. Maria rolled up her sleeve and dipped the net deeper, angling it toward the object. The pole wobbled in her grip, the watch shifting slightly with each nudge. She held her breath, guiding it closer to the edge. After a tense minute, the net snagged it. She pulled it up, water dripping onto the grass. In her hands was a sleek silver watch, its face scratched but intact. She turned it over and saw faint initials etched on the back. TH. Maria's mind raced. Could it belong to the owner? She'd heard rumors from other staff. A famous actor lived here, someone big in movies. She didn't follow gossip, but the initials sparked a guess. Tom Hanks? Her chest tightened. If it was his, returning it might mean more than a thank you. It could be a chance to ask for help, maybe an advance on her pay. She wiped the watch dry with her shirt, its weight solid in her palm. With the watch tucked safely in her pocket, Maria gathered her courage. She'd never been inside the house. Gardeners stayed outside, invisible to the residents. But this was different. She walked toward the back entrance, her steps quickening. The door was plain, meant for staff, flanked by a row of potted ferns. She pushed it open, stepping into a hallway lined with polished wood. Voices echoed from deeper inside, sharp commands, the clatter of dishes. A lunch event was being prepared, she realized. The staff buzzed like bees in a hive. A tall woman in a black blazer strode toward her, clipboard in hand. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone clipped. Her name tag read Clara, head of staff. Maria straightened. "I'm Maria, the gardener. I found something in the pond." She held out the watch, her voice steady despite her nerves. Clara's eyes narrowed, then widened as she recognized the item. "Where did you get that?" she asked, snatching it from Maria's hand. "It was in the water. I cleaned it off," Maria said. "I think it belongs to Mr. Hanks." Clara studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Wait here," she ordered, then turned and disappeared down the hall. Maria stood awkwardly, the hum of activity swirling around her. Cooks carried trays, cleaners polished surfaces, everyone moving with purpose. She felt out of place, her muddy boots leaving faint marks on the floor. Minutes later, Clara returned, her face stern. "Follow me, he wants to see you." Maria's heart thudded. She trailed Clara through the house, passing rooms filled with sleek furniture and framed posters. They reached a study, its door ajar. Inside stood Tom Hanks, his familiar face creased with curiosity. He wore a simple sweater, his hair slightly tousled, nothing like the polished star she'd seen on TV. "You're the gardener?" he asked, his voice warm but direct. He stepped closer, holding the watch Clara had handed him. "Yes, sir." "I'm Maria. I found it in the pond while cleaning, she said, meeting his gaze. Tom turned the watch in his hands, a small smile forming. This was my dad's. I lost it years ago. Thought it was gone for good. How'd you spot it? It was shining under the water. I used the net to fish it out, she explained. He nodded, impressed. That's sharp eyes. Thank you, Maria. This means a lot. His tone was genuine, his eyes kind. He slipped the watch onto his wrist, testing its fit. Maria shifted her weight, the phone message flashing in her mind. She wanted to speak, to ask for help, but the words stuck. I'm glad I could return it, Mr. Hanks, she said instead, her voice soft. Call me Tom, he said, waving a hand. You've done me a favor today. Stick around after your shift. I'd like to talk more. He paused, then added, Clara, make sure Maria gets a meal with the staff. She's earned it. Clara frowned but nodded. Yes, sir. She gestured for Maria to follow her out. As they left the study, Maria's mind spun. A meal was more than she'd expected. She hadn't eaten since dawn. But Tom's invitation to talk later sparked hope. Maybe this was her opening, a way to fix things for her father. Clara led her to the kitchen where a plate of warm food waited. Chicken, rice, steamed carrots. Maria sat at a small table, the staff eyeing her curiously. She ate quietly, the flavors bursting after months of scraps. Her thoughts drifted between relief and anticipation. She'd crossed a line today, stepping into the house, meeting the man behind the estate. What would come next? Maria wiped her hands on her jeans, the taste of warm chicken and rice still lingering as she stepped out of the kitchen. The estate hummed with energy. Staff darted through the halls, preparing for the lunch event Tom had mentioned. She returned to the gardens, her boots sinking into the soft earth. The pond gleamed in the afternoon light, its surface now clear of debris. She picked up her rake, resuming her work along the stone paths. Each sweep pushed away twigs and dust, her mind buzzing with Tom's words. Stick around after your shift. I'd like to talk more. The promise of that conversation fueled her. She moved faster, trimming hedges near the patio, pulling weeds from a flower bed bursting with marigolds. Her muscles ached, but she welcomed the strain. It kept her focused. The care facility's message gnawed at her thoughts. She needed money not just for today, but for tomorrow and the days after. Tom's kindness over the watch gave her an edge, a chance to ask for an advance. She rehearsed the words silently, testing them as she worked. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange. Maria finished her tasks, stacking her tools near the shed. She glanced at the house, its windows glowing as the event unfolded inside. Laughter and music drifted out, a world she didn't belong to. Her shift was over, but Tom had asked her to stay. She lingered near the back entrance, brushing dirt from her shirt, unsure what to expect. Clara emerged from the door, her blazer crisp despite the day's chaos. Maria, she said, her voice flat. Mr. Hanks wants you in the library. Follow me. Her tone carried an edge, like she resented Maria's sudden favor. Maria nodded, trailing her through the staff entrance. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with photos of Tom on movie sets, smiling with crews, holding awards. She kept her eyes forward, her stomach twisting with nerves. They reached the library, a room of dark wood and tall shelves. Tom stood near a window, gazing out at the gardens Maria had shaped. He turned as they entered, his face lighting up. Maria, good to see you again. He gestured to a chair. Take a seat. Clara, you can go. Clara hesitated, then left, the door clicking shut behind her. Maria sat, her hands clasped in her lap. The room smelled of leather and paper, a quiet contrast to the garden's earthy scent. Tom settled into a chair across from her, the watch gleaming on his wrist. You did a solid thing today, he said. This watch. It's been with me through a lot. My dad gave it to me before he passed. Means more than I can say. Maria smiled faintly. I'm glad it's back where it belongs, Tom. She paused, gathering her nerve. I don't usually come inside. I just thought it was important. It was, he said, leaning forward. You've got a good eye out there. The gardens look better than ever. How long have you been working here? 7 months, she answered. I started through a temp service, keeps me going. He nodded, studying her. You're not like the others, always rushing off after work. What's your story, Maria? The question caught her off guard. She shifted in her seat, the truth pressing against her chest. She could dodge it, keep her tent a secret, but his steady gaze pulled her in. It's not much of a story, she began. My dad got sick, heart trouble, bills piled up. I lost my place. Now I work to keep him in care. It's tight. Tom's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Maria took a breath, pushing forward. Today I got a message. They're cutting his care unless I pay by tomorrow. I was going to ask maybe for an advance. I know it's bold, but I'm out of moves. Silence hung between them. Tom leaned back, his fingers tapping the armrest. That's a heavy load, he said finally. I've been there. Family pulling you every which way. My mum had a rough go with her health too. I get it. Maria's hope flickered. I just need a little help to get through this. I'll work extra, whatever it takes. He held up a hand. Hold on. We'll figure something out, but first, I need you back out there. The event's winding down and the patio's a mess. Cups, plates, you name it. Can you handle cleanup? She stood, eager to prove herself. Yes, I can do that. Good, he said, rising too. Meet me here after. We'll talk money then. He flashed a grin. You're tougher than you look, Maria. She left the library, her steps lighter. Clara waited outside, arms crossed. Patio duty, she snapped. Don't dawdle. Maria grabbed a trash bag and broom from the shed, heading to the patio. Guests had scattered wrappers and napkins across the stone, chairs tipped over in the rush to leave. She swept and bagged, the work grounding her. Tom's words replayed in her mind. Help was close, if she could hold on. As she tied off the last bag, her phone rang. She pulled it out, stepping behind a hedge for privacy. Hello, she said. Mr. Torres, it's Dr. Ellis, a calm voice replied. Your father's condition shifted, his heart's weakening, fluid in his lungs. We need to start a new treatment tonight, or he won't make it through the week. It's costly, but urgent. Maria's throat tightened. How much? 5,000 to start, the doctor said. Can you approve it? She gripped the phone, her mind reeling. Yes, do it. I'll find a way. The call ended, and she stood frozen, the broom slipping from her hand. 5,000 was a mountain she couldn't climb, not with her pay, not even with an advance. Panic clawed at her, but she shoved it down. She had to finish here, talk to Tom. He was her only shot. Maria hauled the trash bags to the dumpster, her arms trembling from more than the weight. She returned to the library, knocking softly. Tom opened the door, his smile fading as he saw her face. What's wrong? He asked, ushering her in. It's my dad, she said, her voice breaking. He's worse. They need money tonight, 5,000, or he's gone. I told them yes, but I don't have it. Tom's eyes widened. 5,000? That's steep. He paced, then stopped. Okay, listen. I'll cover it. Emergency loan, no strings, but I need you here tomorrow. Big dinner event. You're on staff now, not just gardens. Deal? Tears pricked her eyes. Deal. Thank you, Tom. I'll be here. He grabbed a notepad, scribbling a number. Call this. My assistant, Jen. She'll wire the money tonight. Your dad's covered. He handed her the paper, his expression firm. Go home. Rest. Tomorrow's a fresh start. Maria clutched the note, gratitude flooding her. She left the library, the house quiet now, the event long over. Outside, the night air hit her face, sharp and cold. She walked toward the gate, her tent waiting in the shadows. Tom thought she had a home to go to. He didn't know the truth, not yet. But his help had bought her time, and tomorrow she'd prove her worth. Maria stumbled through the dark, her flashlight beam bouncing off the bushes as she reached her tent. The estate's lights shrank behind her, swallowed by the night. She slipped inside, the familiar dampness greeting her. Her sleeping bag lay crumpled where she'd left it, the cracked plastic bowl glinting faintly in the corner. She sank onto the ground, pulling out the note Tom had given her. His assistant's number stared back, a lifeline she couldn't waste. She dialed, her fingers shaky. "Jen speaking," a brisk voice answered after 2 rings. "Hi, it's Maria Torres," she said, keeping her tone steady. "Tom, Mr. Hanks, told me to call you. It's about my dad's treatment. $5,000. "Got it," Jen replied, her efficiency cutting through Maria's nerves. "I'll wire it to the facility now. Name and address?" Maria rattled off the details, her voice tight. "It's urgent. Tonight." "Done," Jen said. "Check with them in an hour. Anything else?" "No, that's all, thank you," Maria managed, relief washing over her as the call ended. She set the phone down, her breath slowing. Her father had a chance now. Tom had made it real. She curled into the sleeping bag, the day's weight pressing her into the earth. Sleep came fast, dreamless, her body too tired to fight the cold. Morning broke with a grey haze, the air thick with mist. Maria woke, stiff, her back protesting the hard ground. She crawled out of the tent, stretching as the estate loomed in the distance. Today was the dinner event Tom had mentioned, her first shift beyond the gardens. She changed into her spare shirt, a faded green one, and brushed her hair with her fingers. Her reflection in a small mirror showed tired eyes, but she squared her shoulders. She had to show up, prove she belonged. She hid her tent deeper in the bushes, then walked to the staff entrance. The gardens greeted her. Rows of lavender and marigolds she'd nurtured, now dusted with dew. Inside, the house buzzed with new energy. Staff hauled tables into the dining hall, draped them with crisp linens. Maria found Clara near the kitchen, barking orders at a flustered cook. "You're late," Clara said, spotting her. "Mr. Hanks insists you're on staff now. You're setting tables. Don't mess it up." Maria nodded, grabbing a stack of plates from a cart. "I won't." She moved to the dining hall, laying out silverware with care. The room gleamed, chandeliers sparkling, walls lined with art. She worked silently, her hands steady despite Clara's glare from across the room. Other staff whispered, curious about the gardener turned insider, but Maria kept her focus. Midway through, her phone buzzed. She slipped it out, hiding behind a pillar. It was the care facility. "Mrs. Torres, the payment cleared," a nurse said. "Your father's treatment started at dawn. He's holding steady." Maria exhaled, a knot loosening in her chest. "Thank you. I'll visit soon." She pocketed the phone, returning to the tables with renewed energy. The news fueled her. Her father was fighting, and she would too. As she adjusted a napkin, Tom appeared, dressed in a casual jacket. "Maria, how's it going?" he asked, his voice cutting through the room's hum. "Good," she said, meeting his eyes. "The money went through. My dad's getting help. I can't thank you enough." He waved it off. "Glad it worked out. You're doing great here. Keep it up. Tonight's big. Investors, friends. We're showing off the place." He glanced at her shirt. "We'll get you a proper uniform after this. Something that fits." She smiled. "A real one." "I'd like that." Tom clapped her shoulder, then moved off to check the kitchen. Maria finished the tables, stepping back to admire the setup. The room looked sharp, ready for the crowd. But hunger tugged at her. She'd skipped breakfast, too rushed to scavenge. She eyed a tray of bread rolls cooling nearby, her stomach growling. Clara's voice snapped her out of it. "No eating on duty," she said, passing by. "Buy your own if you're hungry." Maria nodded, embarrassed. She had no cash. Her last dollar went to gas days ago. The event loomed, hours of work ahead. She couldn't falter now. She grabbed a glass of water instead, sipping it to quiet her stomach, then moved to the patio to sweep. Guests would arrive soon, and she needed to stay sharp. The afternoon blurred into evening. Maria hauled chairs, polished railings, her energy draining. Guests trickled in, suits and dresses, voices loud with excitement. She darted between tasks, clearing plates, refilling water jugs. Tom mingled, his laugh echoing, but he caught her eye once, nodding approval. It kept her going. Then disaster struck. Carrying a tray of empty glasses, she tripped over a rug's edge. The tray crashed, glass shattering across the floor. Heads turned, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Clara stormed over, her face tight with fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, yanking Maria aside. "You're a liability. Clean this up, now." Maria knelt, gathering shards, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "It slipped." "Save it," Clara snapped. "Mr. Hanks might trust you, but I don't. One more mistake and you're gone." She spun away, leaving Maria amid the mess. Guests stared, some amused, some annoyed. She swept the glass into a pile, her cheeks burning. The day's hope felt fragile now, cracking like the broken pieces at her feet. Tom approached, his expression calm. "You okay?" he asked, crouching beside her. "Yeah," she lied, brushing hair from her face. "Just clumsy. Happens to everyone," he said, helping her lift the last shards into a bin. "Don't let Clara scare you. You're still in this?" He stood, offering a hand. She took it, rising, grateful for his steadiness. As he returned to the guests, Maria finished cleaning, her mind racing. She couldn't afford another slip, not with her father's life tied to this job. She threw herself back into work, hauling trash, wiping tables, determined to end the night strong. The event wound down, guests departing under the stars. Maria lingered, exhausted but resolute, waiting for Tom's next move. Then her phone rang again. She stepped outside, the cool air sharp against her skin. It was the facility. "Maria, it's Dr. Ellis," the voice said. "Your father's taken a turn. The treatment's helping, but we found an infection, his lungs. We need antibiotics, another 2,000, or it'll spread fast." Her heart dropped. 2,000? She whispered. "I don't have that. We need an answer now," the doctor pressed. "Can you cover it?" Maria's grip tightened on the phone. Tom's loan had saved her once, but this? She couldn't ask again, not so soon. Yet her father's life hung on it. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. "Start it. I'll figure it out." The call ended, and she stood frozen, the estate's glow mocking her desperation. She had to tell Tom now. She hurried inside, finding him in the dining hall, reviewing the night with staff. "Tom," she said, interrupting, "I need to talk." "It's my dad." "Another emergency. $2,000. I hate asking, but it's life or death." His face shifted, concern etching lines. "Another hit. Okay, breathe. We'll sort it. Jen's on it. Same drill. But Maria, we need to talk about your setup. You can't keep running on fumes." She nodded, relief mixing with dread. He didn't know her real setup, not yet. As he called Jen, Maria slipped out, her tent calling her back. The truth was close to spilling, and tomorrow it would change everything. Maria trudged through the misty darkness, her flashlight cutting a narrow path to her tent. The estate's lights faded behind her, swallowed by the night's thick shroud. She slipped inside her shelter, the damp fabric brushing her shoulders. Her sleeping bag welcomed her like an old friend, and she sank into it, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The phone call from Dr. Ellis echoed in her mind. $2,000. Another lifeline for her father. Tom's promise to handle it through Jen steadied her, but his words lingered. "We need to talk about your setup." He was close to the truth, and she wasn't ready. She dialed the care facility, her voice hoarse. "It's Maria Torres. Did the payment go through?" "Yes," a nurse replied. "Received an hour ago. Antibiotics started. He's responding. Rest easy tonight." Maria exhaled, tension easing from her chest. "Thank you." She ended the call, curling tighter into the sleeping bag. The cold seeped through, but relief warmed her. Her father had another day. Sleep claimed her, heavy and unbroken, until the first rays of dawn pierced the tent's seams. Morning arrived with a soft glow, the mist thinning over the estate. Maria emerged, stiff but determined. She folded her sleeping bag, stashed it with her bowl, and hid the tent deeper in the bushes. Today was different. Tom knew her struggles, at least partly. She wore her green shirt again, brushing off dirt, and headed to the staff entrance. The gardens stretched before her, a quiet testament to her work, but her role had shifted. She was staff now, not just a gardener. Inside, the house buzzed with aftermath. Staff cleared the dining hall, stacking chairs from last night's event. Maria found Tom in the kitchen, sipping coffee, his jacket slung over a chair. He looked up, his eyes sharp but kind. "Maria, morning. Jen wired the money, your dad's set. How you holding up?" "Better," she said, standing near the counter. He's fighting the infection. I owe you more than I can say. Tom set his mug down. You don't owe me. Just keep showing up. Last night was rough, but you pulled through. Clara's still fuming about the glass, though. He chuckled, then grew serious. Let's talk. You said you lost your place. Where are you staying? Maria froze, her pulse quickening. She'd dodged this before, but his gaze pinned her now. Nearby, she said, vague. I manage. He tilted his head. Nearby's not an address. Look, I'm not prying for fun. If you're in a bind, I can help. What's the real story? Her throat tightened. She could lie again, but the weight of it all, tent, hunger, fear, crushed her resolve. I live out there, she admitted, nodding toward the gardens, in a tent, behind the bushes. Been there 7 months. It's why I'm always here. Tom's face shifted, surprise giving way to understanding. He stepped closer, voice low. A tent. Maria? Why didn't you say something? Shame, she said simply. I didn't want anyone knowing. I thought I could fix it, work enough, save enough, but it's not enough. He ran a hand through his hair, processing. Okay, that's a lot. You've been right under my nose, and I didn't see it. Come with me. He grabbed his jacket, motioning her to follow. They walked outside, the air crisp against her skin. He led her past the patio, through the gardens, to the spot she'd hidden so well. The bushes parted, revealing her tent. Blue, faded, sagging. Tom stopped, staring. This is it? Yeah, she said, her voice small. Home. He knelt, peering inside. Sleeping bag, bowl, neat stacks of clothes. He stood, his jaw tight. You're not staying here another night. Grab your stuff. We're moving you in. Maria blinked. In? Where? Guest quarters, he said, firm. There's a room, bed, heat, walls. You're staff now, and I don't let my people live like this. He paused, softer. I've got a sister who hit hard times once. I helped her climb out. I can do the same for you. Her eyes stung, but she held it together. I don't know what to say, Tom. Say you'll take it, he replied, and help me carry this. He grinned, tugging at the tent's edge. Together they dismantled it, folding the fabric, gathering her things. Maria clutched her bowl, its cracks a reminder of where she'd been. They hauled it all to a small building near the house. Staff quarters, clean and warm. Her room had a cot, a dresser, a window overlooking her gardens. Settle in, Tom said, dropping the tent by the door. Then meet me in the garage. I've got an idea. Maria unpacked quickly, her few belongings looking small in the space. She washed her face in a real sink, the water hot against her hands. It felt unreal. Safety, shelter, a roof. She joined Tom in the garage, where he stood by a sleek black car, keys in hand. Hop in, he said. We're going somewhere. She slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool beneath her. Where? Hospital, he said, starting the engine. You need to see your dad. I'll drive. The car purred onto the road, the estate shrinking in the rear view. Maria watched the city blur past, her mind spinning. Why are you doing this? She asked, glancing at him. Tom kept his eyes ahead. My sister. She was in a bad spot once, like I said. No one stepped up till I did. Took her to a place where she could heal. Your dad's fighting, you're fighting. I've got the means, why not use them? She nodded, gratitude swelling. The hospital rose ahead, a grey block against the sky. They parked, and Tom followed her inside, his presence steadying her. The nurse at the desk waved them through. Room 214, she said. He's awake. Maria entered, her father's frail form propped on pillows. Tubes ran from his arms, but his eyes lit up. Maria, he rasped, voice weak but warm. Dad, she said, rushing to his side. She took his hand, its grip faint. You're okay, thanks to you, he murmured. They said the money came through. And Tom, she added, glancing back. He stood by the door, giving them space. Her father squinted. Tom Hanks? The actor? Yeah, Tom said, stepping forward. Heard a lot about you, Mr. Torres. Tough guy, hanging in there. Her father chuckled, a dry sound. Didn't expect this. Thank you. Tom shrugged. Just glad I could help. Maria's been keeping my gardens alive. She's the real star. They talked, the room filling with quiet ease. Maria watched her father's color improve, the antibiotics working. Tom asked about his old job, construction, and shared a story about building sets on a film. Laughter broke the tension, a rare sound for Maria. As they left, Tom stopped her in the hall. He's a fighter, like you. I'm covering the rest, treatment, bills, all of it. My foundation's got it. You focus on work, on him. Maria stared, words failing. Tom, that's too much. It's not, he said. Your family now, staff's family. Back at the house you've got a job, a room, a start. Deal? Deal, she whispered, tears slipping free. They drove back, the day fading into dusk. Maria's tent was gone, replaced by a real bed. Her father was safe, and Tom was more than a boss now. He was a bridge to something better. The car rolled back onto the estate as dusk settled, the sky a deep purple streaked with fading light. Maria sat in silence, the hospital visit replaying in her mind. Her father's weak smile, Tom's steady voice. It felt like a dream she might wake from. The guest quarters loomed ahead, her new room a stark upgrade from the tent's damp walls. Tom parked, turning to her. You're set for tonight. Tomorrow's a fresh day. Staff meeting at 8. We'll sort your role. Maria nodded, clutching her small bag of belongings. I'll be there. Thanks, Tom, for everything. He waved it off. Sleep well, you've earned it. He drove off toward the main house, leaving her at the quarters door. She stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around her like a blanket. Her room waited. Cot made, dresser empty, a real space to call hers. She set her cracked bowl on the dresser, a relic of her past now out of place. She washed up, the hot water a luxury, then sank onto the bed. Sleep came fast, her body sinking into the mattress, the first restful night in months. Morning arrived with a sharp knock. Maria jolted awake, sunlight streaming through the window. She dressed quickly, green shirt, jeans, and opened the door. A young staffer, Luis, stood there, his apron dusted with flour. Meeting starting. Tom sent me to grab you. She followed him to the dining hall, the same room she'd set up yesterday. Staff gathered around tables, sipping coffee, their chatter low. Tom stood at the front, casual in a flannel shirt, the watch gleaming on his wrist. Clara hovered nearby, her clipboard clutched tight, her eyes flicking to Maria with a mix of suspicion and resignation. Morning, everyone, Tom began, his voice carrying. Last night went well. Guests loved the place. Today's lighter, just clean up and prep for next week's fundraiser. I've got an update, though. Maria Torres, our gardener, is joining us full-time. She's moving indoors, table setups, event support, whatever we need. She's proven she's got the grit. Heads turned, some nodding, others whispering. Clara's lips thinned, but she stayed silent. Maria shifted, heat rising to her cheeks. Tom caught her eye, giving a quick nod. Luis, you're training her today. Show her the ropes. Louise grinned, waving her over. Stick with me, Maria. We'll get you up to speed. The meeting broke, staff scattering to their tasks. Maria followed Louise to the kitchen, where he handed her a stack of trays. We're restocking for lunch. Simple stuff. Plates here, glasses there. You'll catch on. She dove in, stacking dishes with care, her hands finding a rhythm. Louise chatted as they worked, stories of past events, Tom's quirks, the estate's history. He's big on loyalty, Louise said, wiping a counter. Keeps us tight-knit. You're in good hands. Mid-morning, her phone buzzed. She stepped aside, answering quietly. Maria, it's Dr. Ellis, the voice said. Your dad's infection's clearing. He's stable, might even leave the hospital soon if he keeps improving. Her heart lifted. That's great. Can I visit today? Afternoon, sure, the doctor replied. He's asking for you. She hung up, a smile breaking free. Louise noticed. Good news? Yeah, she said. My dad's getting better. Sweet, he said, tossing her a rag. Wipe these down, then you're free till lunch. She cleaned, her mind on her father. Tom's foundation had covered it all. No more scrambling, no more fear. She finished early, slipping outside to the gardens. The lavender swayed, her old domain still thriving. She breathed it in, grounding herself. Lunch came. Staff gathered in the kitchen, sharing a spread of sandwiches and soup. Maria ate with them, the chatter washing over her. No more scavenging, no more hiding. Clara approached, her tone clipped. "Tom wants you in the office after this. Don't dawdle." Maria nodded, finishing her meal. She found Tom in a small room off the hall, papers spread across a desk. He looked up, smiling. "Maria, sit. Your dad's doing okay." "Better," she said, taking a chair. "Doctor says he might come home soon." "That's what I like to hear," he said, leaning back. "I've been thinking. You're solid, reliable. I'm making you permanent. Full pay, benefits, the works. And when your dad's out, we'll set him up here. Guest house out back. Room for both of you." Her jaw dropped. "Tom, I can't believe it." "Believe it," he said. "You've earned a spot. My sister lived there when she needed it. Now it's yours. Plus, I need someone with your eye on the gardens and the events. You're a 2-for-1 deal." She laughed, the sound surprising her. "I'll take it. Thank you." He handed her a key. "Guest house key. Check it out later. For now, head to the hospital. See your dad. Luis can cover." Maria gripped the key, its weight real in her hand. She left, driving Tom's borrowed car, a spare he'd tossed her the keys to earlier. The hospital hummed with life as she arrived. Her father sat up in bed, color back in his cheeks. "Maria," he said, reaching for her, "you look different." "Lighter." "I am," she said, hugging him. "We've got a place now. Tom Hanks. He's giving us a home, a job, everything." His eyes widened. "Hanks? The movie guy?" "Yeah," she said, grinning. "He's real. Helped us when I couldn't." They talked, catching up, planning. He'd move in next week if tests cleared. Maria drove back, the guest house waiting, a small cottage with a porch, windows overlooking her gardens. She stepped inside, the space clean and bright. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a life rebuilt. Days later, her father arrived, frail but smiling, leaning on her arm. Tom greeted them, carrying a box of his old records as a housewarming gift. "Thought you'd like some tunes," he said, setting it down. "Welcome home." Maria watched her father settle in, the estate alive around them, staff working, gardens blooming. She joined the team fully, balancing indoor duties with her green haven. Tom checked in, his trust in her unwavering. Clara softened, grudgingly impressed by Maria's knack for detail. One evening, as the fundraiser kicked off, Maria stood on the patio, trays in hand, her father watching from the cottage window. Tom joined her, raising a glass. "You turned it around, Maria. Proud of you." She clinked her water to his. "Couldn't have without you." The night sparkled, guests marveling at the gardens she'd shaped, the home she'd earned. Her tent days faded, a memory replaced by roots, deep, strong, hers. The fundraiser's lights twinkled across the estate, casting a warm glow over the gardens Maria had tended for so long. She moved through the crowd, balancing a tray of drinks, her steps sure on the patio stones. Guests admired the marigolds and lavender, their praise drifting to her ears as she passed. Her father watched from the guesthouse porch, a blanket over his knees, his smile faint but steady. Tom stood nearby, chatting with a group of investors, his laughter cutting through the hum. Maria caught his eye, and he raised his glass, a silent toast to her new beginning. The night wore on, the air cooling as stars pierced the sky. Maria swapped trays for a broom, clearing stray napkins and petals from the paths. Her father had gone inside, the cottage lights dimming as he rested. She worked alone now, the staff winding down, the event's energy fading. Her green shirt was swapped for a new uniform, dark pants, a crisp vest, fitting her role as both gardener and insider. She paused by the pond, its surface still, the memory of the watch surfacing. That glint had changed everything. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned to see Tom, hands in his pockets, the watch gleaming on his wrist. "You're a natural at this," he said, nodding at the cleaned path. Guests couldn't stop talking about the gardens. "And you." Maria set the broom aside, brushing her hands. "They're my pride, always will be. Thanks for giving me this shot, Tom." He shrugged, his grin easy. "You gave me back a piece of my dad, least I could do." He glanced at the guest house. How's he settling in? Good, she said. He's walking more, talking about fixing up the porch, keeps him busy. Glad to hear it, Tom replied. Listen, I've got something cooking. Next month we're hosting a film crew. Small project, backyard shoot. I want you on it. Gardens as the star, you running point with the crew. Her eyes widened. Me? I don't know anything about films. You know this place, he said, tapping his temple. That's what matters. Crew needs someone who can keep the ground sharp, handle their gear, make it smooth. You're quick. You'll learn. Pays double for the week. Maria's mind raced. Double pay could mean a car of her own, not borrowed, or savings, a buffer against the unexpected. I'm in, she said. Just tell me where to start. Tomorrow, he said. Meeting with Jen. She's coordinating. She'll walk you through it. He paused, studying her. You've got a knack, Maria. More than you think. She smiled, the weight of his trust settling in. I'll figure it out. Always do. Tom clapped her shoulder. That's the spirit. Night's yours now. Rest up. He headed back to the house, leaving her by the pond. Maria lingered, the quiet wrapping around her. The estate felt different now. Not just a job, but a stake she'd claimed. She returned to the guest house, her father asleep, the cottage peaceful. She sank into her bed, the film gig spinning in her thoughts. Sleep came, laced with possibility. Days rolled into weeks. Maria threw herself into prep, meeting Jen daily. The assistant was all business, charts, schedules, lists of plants the crew wanted featured. Maria learned fast, sketching layouts, marking spots for cameras. Her father helped, hobbling out with a pencil to suggest angles, his old construction eye sharp. They laughed over coffee, rebuilding their rhythm. His health held, lungs clear, heart steady. Thanks to Tom's foundation, the shoot arrived, transforming the estate. Trucks rumbled in, unloading lights and cables. Maria directed the crew, pointing out paths, shifting pots for shots. Her gardens glowed on camera, lavender swaying, roses framing a scene. Tom acted in it, a quiet role, his presence drawing the team's focus. He'd wink at her between takes, a nod to their deal. Clara watched from the sidelines, her skepticism fading as Maria ran the show. One afternoon, a director, a wiry man named Ely, pulled her aside. "You're good at this," he said, chewing a toothpick. "Ever think about crew work? We're short hands next job, up north 2 months. Pays solid." Maria hesitated. "I've got roots here now. My dad, this place. Fair," Eli said. "Offers open if you change your mind. Tom vouches for you. That's gold in this game." He handed her a card, walking off. She tucked it away, the idea simmering. Leave the estate? She couldn't. Not yet. But the chance lingered. A door cracked open. The chute wrapped, the crew packing out. Tom hosted a small wrap party. Staff, actors, a grill fired up on the patio. Maria served burgers, her father beside her flipping patties. Guests mingled, praising the film, the gardens, her work. Tom joined them, a beer in hand. "Told you you'd nail it," he said. "Eli's impressed. Says you've got an eye." She grinned. "Learn from the best. You and Dad. Sticking here, though. This is home." "Smart call," he said, raising his bottle. "To whom, then?" "And to you, Maria. Keeping this place alive." Her father clinked his soda can to theirs. "To my girl. And you, Tom. Gave us a shot when we had nothing." They drank, the night settling soft around them. Maria looked out, gardens thriving, cottage lit, staff laughing. Her tent days were a shadow, erased by sweat and trust. The estate was hers now, not just to tend, but to shape. Eli's card stayed in her pocket, a maybe for later. For now, she had roots, a father breathing easy, a boss who saw her. The next morning, Tom found her by the pond, speechless at her transformation, gardener to cornerstone, a story he'd never scripted. Weeks later, a letter came. Her father's discharge papers, full recovery. Maria framed it, hung it in the cottage. She added a bench to the garden, carved her initials into it. Tom saw it, laughed, added his own. The estate grew, projects piling, more shoots, events, her hands on every one. She hired a kid to help with the plants, passing on what she'd learned. Her father built a birdhouse, nailed it to the porch. Life settled, strong and sure. One evening, Maria stood by the pond, the watch's old spot shimmering. Tom joined her, quiet. "You're not the gardener I hired," he said. "You're more." She met his gaze. "You're not just the boss I met. Thanks for seeing me." He nodded, the silence full. The estate hummed behind them, her world remade. Maria's tale closed with her standing tall, the tent a distant echo. Tom's shock that first morning had sparked it all, a ripple that built her a life. From bushes to bench she'd carved her place, more than she'd ever dreamed.